That is Congressman Brad Wenstrup of the great state of Ohio. And Congressman, welcome again to the Bill Cunningham Show. And Congressman, did you spend time watching that or not?
No, I did not. And actually, when that was going on last night, I was in the air leaving D.C. to come back to Cincinnati, Ohio, and glad to be home and away from that arena for a little while.
Well, you didn't miss anything, believe me. As far as what transpired, and I watched a couple of YouTube videos that you have. One is the assassination attempt of the leadership of the Congress from the Republican perspective from Hoskinson about 4 or 5 years ago. That's largely not been dealt with. And then the other issue was, of course, inflation. The numbers on inflation right now are through the roof, and the markets are extremely ugly. But first of all, let's talk about the issue of January the 6th, the presentation of Congressman Benny Thompson and also Liz Cheney, who's completely lost her way, dealt with putting the ring of responsibility around Donald Trump and among the few thousand people that invaded the Capitol. And I couldn't agree more with those individuals who beat up cops, who beat them in the head, who pepper sprayed the cops, who brought the gallows to the Capitol to hang Mike Pence, to commit acts of vandalism and trespass and felonies that were committed, especially against innocent cops. I could not agree more with the idea that those need to be fully prosecuted. But the presentation mainly dealt with Donald Trump and making sure he would be unelectable in 2024. And the one thing that's missing, and this came out repeatedly, is that the Congress was notified ahead of time, not the Congress, but Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in charge were notified ahead of time of the risks involved with this January 6th get-together. And there were repeated attempts by the president and others to get the National Guard there, some 20,000 National Guardsmen around the Capitol, and none of this would have happened at all. And one congressman last night made the comment, it's almost as if Nancy Pelosi might have wished for something like this to occur so that she would have a campaign issue. What ability do you Republicans in the Congress have now to look at the communication of Nancy Pelosi in the days leading up to this event? And is that off limits? That's something you can't look at.
Yeah, so Benny Thompson, who's in charge of this so-called commission, and I really can only say so-called because they're not even complying with their own charter, for one, with the way it's set up and the way they're carrying it on. But Benny Thompson has said that Speaker Pelosi's off limits, so her communications, et cetera, they're not going to ask for those. They're not going to get those, but they're digging at everybody else. I've got constituents that have had the FBI come to their home and they didn't even go to the Capitol. I mean, this is what's taken place. But look, we are no closer with this whole process at finding out what led to the catastrophic security failure on January 6th. I agree with you 100% when you said people are responsible for their own actions.
Absolutely.
Essentially, that's what you said. When we got shot at the baseball field, if not for a gun being present, by the way, and Capitol Police that were there undercover, this guy who had planned this for 2 months, this guy would have killed 20 to 30 Republicans and gotten away with those murders, if not for Capitol Police being there and a variety of other circumstances in our favor. But we always held him, even Steve Scalise, who was hit the worst. Even he has said, this guy is responsible for his own actions. I am not going to blame Bernie Sanders, who the guy was a big fan of, and I'm not going to blame his hatred for Donald Trump, because he is responsible for his actions. I held the people responsible in my mind, those that were committing all the crimes the summer before last, that were attacking our federal buildings, that were killing people in our streets and burning our cities down. They're responsible for their actions. But if you want to actually look at rhetoric, you should look at some of the things that Schumer has said, and that many Democrats have said that are inciting. But again, I don't blame them. I blame the people that have committed these actions. And, you know, I went to the committee or rules committee on this commission. So before they could sanction the commission and vote on it, it goes to rules committee where you can offer amendments. And I went there and I said, if you're really serious about protecting this physical building and all of those who work in here, and you're really after trying to find out what went wrong and how we can better prepare ourselves, then please include the events of June 14th, 2017, coming up on 5 years ago this week, at the baseball field. Because, again, if Capitol Police weren't there, unbeknownst to the shooter, you got 20 or 30 people dead. So let's take a look at that event as well. What were the failures there? How can we harden ourselves in the future? How can we be better prepared to react, or be prepared in ahead of time so we don't have to react to anything? And so I offered that amendment to include that in the commission, and it was voted down by the Democrats. They told me right there, you're not serious about what this should be about, which is trying to make things better going forward. And so what they're only trying to do, it seems, is make this about Donald Trump. And I think that's probably what people saw last night. I didn't watch it. Even if I was home, I wouldn't have watched it because, as I said to one surgeon who asked me if I watch these shows, I said, do you go home and watch your surgeries at night? No. So I'm living in it. I don't need to watch it. I know what's coming. I know what they're all about. You know, some bad things happened that day. And let's make sure it doesn't happen again. Right. But that, unfortunately, is not what they're about.
Well, 20,000 National Guardsmen, heck, 500 National Guardsmen in uniform would have stopped everything that happened. And the Democrats are notified days and hours ahead of time what possibly could occur. And they refuse to call out the National Guard. And I would note that the communications of Nancy Pelosi leading up to January the 6th are off limits until next year. We're going to find out next year when you Republicans take over what actually happened. But how many shots did James Hoskinson fire at the leadership of the Republican Party during that base? Wasn't it some ridiculous, over 100 shots?
Well, between the shells on the ground, between the Capitol Police and Alexandria Police that arrived at the very end, and James Hodgkinson, is 136. 136. And do you know, there was a member of the House, and God bless her, she was at Jonestown, and she was riddled with bullets. She was a staffer at the time, and I have tremendous sympathy for her and the effects of that on her, and I have served with her on an intelligence committee, and we get along. But she stood on the floor talking about guns this week, and she said, I'm the only member of this body who has been a victim of gun violence. It was like, what? Do you not see Steve Scalise limping every day? I mean, I just can't believe how people just come out and say whatever. And again, I'm not taking away from her tragedy and some of the other tragedies that some of our members have experienced. But, you know, let's be realistic here and talk about this in real fashion. And, you know, I spoke out on the floor the other day on the gun control, and they said, look, we've had bans on these things before, and after 10 years, they said it made no difference. And if you're only going to look at the weapon as opposed to the evil person behind the weapon, then we're never going to accomplish anything. As a physician, I think it's only common sense that you look at the events in someone's life that lead to the thoughts and feelings that then lead to the behavior. And is it a breakdown of faith in our country?
Yes.
Is it a breakdown of the family?
Yes.
Is it a breakdown of our mental health system where we just put everyone out on the street rather than caring for them
yes.
in an institution that needed change? Don't get me wrong. I looked at the Democrats yesterday and I said, understand that in my district, in one of my public schools, the left and the courts made them take down "Thou shalt not kill" from in front of the school. So, you know, where have we been going as a country? And if we don't start looking at ourselves in the mirror and our society today, when in the 50s kids brought their weapons to school and stored them in their locker for target practice after school, what has changed? It isn't the weapon. It's our society. And so I think we have to take a look at things that are in a 360-degree realm and not just focus on the gun, because we've tried that before. We've seen this movie before, and it had no effect, and it won't have an effect. Murder's already a crime. They're already willing to commit one of the most heinous crimes known to man. Getting an illegal weapon will not stop them.
When you think about June 14, 2017, that was a one-day story when there was an attempt to decapitate the leadership of the Congress who was practicing for a baseball game. And I watched that same congresswoman. She's from California. I forget her name. I'm sure you know who she is. But I watched her last night on MSNBC talk about the horror. She's the only member of Congress to suffer gunshot wounds at the hands of political extremists. And I'm thinking, Steve Scalise and then Brad Wenstrup and others, there were dozens and dozens, and one, except for your medical intervention, Steve Scalise might have died on the field. And then also a couple nights ago, we have against federal law leftists marching around once again Amy Coney Barrett's house, having already done Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and they found the individual out in front who was mentally ill in possession of semi-automatic weapons, zip ties, and knives. And I can only imagine, Congressman Wenstrup, can you imagine if there was a MAGA hat-wearing Trump supporter out in front of the home of Elena Kagan, U.S. Supreme Court Justice?
Right.
Can you imagine what the media, every member of Congress who is a Republican would be asked by every member of the news media, do you denounce the efforts of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement? Because look what it metastasizes into. Well, James Hoskinson was an extremist mentally ill from Illinois who loved to watch Rachel Maddow, and he paid attention to what they were saying, and he thought it was his duty to go kill Republicans, and he scouted out the location, asked individuals ahead of time, are those the Republicans over there, and shot one and tried to kill all of you. And then you had the same thing happening with Brett Kavanaugh, and this guy also was crazy, came from California all the way to kill Brett Kavanaugh, and it's a one-day story and it's ignored. You would think that political violence would be one of the key elements of the hearing with Benny Thompson, but it never came up at all because it didn't fit the agenda. And now we know from various sources that the day before January the 6th, on January the 5th, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi were notified through NSA wiretaps that there was going to be a massive demonstration with possible violence and attack on the Capitol, and they sat on that information for a day or two or three and didn't want it to happen. And I'm looking at that saying, now, wait a minute. I don't want my Capitol. It looked like a banana republic when hundreds of individuals are terrorizing and vandalizing the representative, House of Representatives in the Senate. It looked like a banana republic. Nobody's in favor of that. But those in charge of the National Guard knew or should have known what was going to happen. None of them took action to stop it. Why?
Yeah, well, we're not getting to that information because we're not looking at their communications and who actually did which was what was being sold. Of the purpose of this commission is to let's make sure this never happens again, and let's look into every aspect. But when we're not getting every aspect, how can we correct problems? And so again, Benny Thompson said Speaker Pelosi's off limits and her communications. How about Chuck Schumer's? Why are we not getting these things? And we need to get them. And again, it still comes down to their personal responsibility of the people that committed these crimes. And all we're seeing out of this commission, and I think America is getting it, Bill, I really do, that all we're seeing is it's an attack on Republicans here and there. And anything they might have said, like, we got to do something. How do we figure this out? All of a sudden that's a bad thing. But we can't look at what Speaker Pelosi maybe communicated in and around those events or before those events. And that's why I think people see it for what it is. It's pretty much a circus. But you know what? If leaders, so-called leaders, they want to be worthy of the name, they need to lead with civility. And they need to call out right when it's right and call out wrong when it's wrong, regardless of which side of the aisle it's coming from. And, if you look at some of the rhetoric, like from Schumer, just even watch the interview the other night with Joe Biden with Jimmy Kimmel, which I don't know why the president is on that show. I doubt it helped his ratings, but he was very aggressive in the things that he was saying. If he was this aggressive against President Xi and President Putin, we might be in a better place today. But he's only aggressive in talking about going after like Supreme Court justices and things like that. This is the rhetoric that we're hearing from people, and I don't think that helps us as a nation. It would really be nice if leaders from both sides of the aisle were out there saying there's right and wrong in this world, and we want you to behave appropriately and behave with civility, and we'll get to the bottom of problems that we have. But we can only do that if we do it openly and honestly, and that's not what we're seeing taking place.
Congressman Wenstrup, after the terrible events of January the 6th happened, for several weeks, all the way into March, first part of April. Nancy Pelosi brought in the National Guard after the horse left the barn, and they were housed basically in underground facilities, parking garages, made to suffer. And then she wanted to keep up the fence even longer, as long as possible, when it didn't matter. When it did matter, and she could have acted responsibly, and this doesn't take away the idiocy of what the president did and what those individuals did at that point. Trump should have spoken up early on, as he was being told by Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and many others, including his own daughter. You got to try to stop it. You got to get on. You got to, and he refused to do it. Trump is responsible for all that. And then also, when he said about Mike Pence that he should have been hanged for not invalidating the electoral votes, that's wrong. You can't have that going on. We can't have our Capitol vandalized and partially ransacked by a mob, no matter what their intentions are. You can't allow that. This is not a banana republic. But at the time, there was a failure of leadership from Pelosi to Schumer to Trump. The one party that acted so well in this regard was VP Mike Pence. I might add, a former radio talk show host on WIBC in Indianapolis. And Pence did exactly what he should have done. I'm glad he did it. But the idea that somehow we're going to ignore the warnings, and Nancy Pelosi, having had requirements to call out the National Guard, refused to do so, and then to have Benny Thompson and others say, you know what, we're not going to go into that. All of her communication are off limits is a sad thing. Well, we have about a minute remaining. I saw your YouTube video on the inflation number this morning, which is through the roof. And that's what people care about. Give me your brief comments on what the administration's not doing with inflation.
Well, we had Secretary Yellen in, and she refused to accept that the things that they're doing cause inflation, even though we showed them many experts, including those that previously served under Democrat regimes, have said, you know, what you're doing with the spending and everything else is hurting us. And the actions that you've taken on the oil industry has risen our prices.
Yeah.
And quit blaming Putin. You know, we're seeing this, but also she refused to recognize that actually revenues to the government went up with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And when we reduced taxes, because more people were working than ever before, and more people were paying taxes, and corporations weren't leaving America. And she said, oh, that's not true. And then we presented her with the facts. I mean, this is just unbelievable what we are dealing with in Washington today. We need more serious players, and they can be from the other side of the aisle. Just be here, ready to work in a real world, rather than your fantasy world of things that really are not true, that don't exist. But, you know, again, you talked about the media. The media just plays right along with them.
Sure.
There's no sharp-witted journalist that says, excuse me, I don't think that's right. Could you please explain your answer? You know, just let them speak.
All right, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you for being there for us, and good luck, and thank you for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. And I'm very, very pleased that you and many others survived the attack on June 14, 2017 by a left-wing extremist that the media refuses even to acknowledge, and that many hope we all have selective memories. But Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you again for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. Good luck. Thank you.
God bless.